Hello, I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute for the Humanities and Alternative College and High School here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this broadcast, number 271, is to catch up with Edward Kennedy. And we're going to look in particular at his latest film, Who Can Find a Good Wife? And touch on all sorts of other topics. Before we do so, just one announcement concerning Apocatastasis, and that is an invitation to subscribe to our Substack. We're really developing our humanities curricula here and has many variations for people to commit to it, whether that's full-time enrollment or monthly seminars, whatever. But one of those, and probably the most accessible, is our weekly Substack output for paid subscribers. So check that out. And without further ado, Edward, welcome.
Thanks for having me again, John.
Absolutely. So it's been at least 2 years since we've spoken in terms of an interview like this. Is that about right? Is my memory
I think it was
the ball?
about 2 years ago, yeah.
What have you been up to? So last time, and we'll touch base on this. Last time we looked at Naked, which we'll catch up on and see how that's doing in terms of recouping its cost. Always important for a producer, but also Archie the Parrot and poetry. I see that in your newsletter. I want to invite the audience to sign up for Edward's newsletters, and various links and so forth will be in the description. But yeah, what have you been up to in general, Edward, before we look at your latest output?
So the last time we spoke, which I think was about 2 years ago, we were talking about my last film, Naked, which for any of your viewers who haven't seen it, is a documentary about life models, or art models as they may be known in the United States. We made the film here in my country, Ireland. And the film has been released by distributor Journeyman Pictures on Prime Video, Apple TV. It's on YouTube Movies now and Vimeo. And that film has done very well. We're delighted with the response, particularly in America, because its best-selling market is in the United States. So we've had a wonderful response to that film. And we were talking about that last time. We've recouped 80% of the budget of that film. I think this is a subject that rarely comes up in interviews, but I'm delighted that you brought it up because it is important, and it can be a thorny subject. But we're delighted with the revenue coming in. In about a year and a half, the film will have recouped its cost, which is rare enough for documentaries. And with regard to the next project, we were originally going to make a murder mystery film after Naked, called Archie the Parrot. But actually, we couldn't get the funds to make this particular film. So the next film is actually called Who Can Find a Good Wife? With regard to Archie the Parrot, it's one of those films that we still plan to make. We'd love to make it. It would cost about $5 million to make. And the problem is that we simply couldn't find the necessary funds to make this particular film. But it's one of the most beautiful projects that I think we've developed, and I'm going to hold on to the script until we do get the funding. But I heard James Mason say this once, the late British film actor, that some of the most wonderful films are the ones that you have developed, you have written, but you couldn't find the funds. And they can be really beautiful because they exist in your mind. But as of now, we haven't been able to make that one. So the new film is a short film called Who Can Find a Good Wife? And it's the first film by my new company, Kennedy Pictures Limited.
Good. Thank you for that, Edward. And, the financial aspect, as we know here at the school, is one that, yes, people don't talk about a lot. And I wonder if we're in the same boat in terms of social dynamics. And so I'm going to pick your mind about this because whenever one tries to build something, be it a school or a picture company or 1,000 other works in between, you realize that most people, they don't have this experience with it. And so I wonder if people in your line of work are facing what we are in alternative education, it seems, and that is to say two things are coming together. One of which is a population which is glutted with free stuff. particularly online, and especially for your line of work, visually. Obviously, with information, which I suppose is my stock and trade, but you have a glut of high quality stuff put out there by the Hollywood and music and so forth. And so there's that competition just for attention and so forth, and a population at the same time, which is, as we spoke about before we started recording, being squeezed financially for all sorts of reasons, not the least of which, as of this recording, is gasoline. And so they're, sensibly very sober about putting out money for things. And conversely, there's indeed an extraordinary abundance, at least superficially, of what we're offering in terms of data or telephonia. So do you have that that sort of headwind, and any thoughts on the matter?
Yes, I think it's a very good question, John. I mean, we're all in the midst of a cost of living crisis at the moment, and it comes up a lot in Ireland too, in my country. Our politicians talk about it all the time. In fact, the government here just brought together a 250 million euro package to assist people with the cost of fuel, with the cost of gas and petrol, and diesel. But I think that you're absolutely right. The market is flooded with content on Netflix, on Amazon, on Apple. This particular film, Naked, is available in the United States on Amazon Prime Video and Apple TV, and I think on YouTube as well.
Mm.
And yeah, I think you've got to convince people that your film is worth forking out a few dollars to watch. And it's difficult. I think what you've really got to do if you're making a film today, whether it's a documentary like this one or the new film we've made as a short film, you've got to ask yourself, has the story been told? Firstly. And if the answer is no, good, maybe then tell the story, but also, what is the audience for this particular film? And I'll be honest with you, we were incredibly naive when we made Naked. We didn't really ask these questions. And it seems awfully stupid in hindsight, because I'll tell you how we financed this film. This film was financed with money from America, but not in the way you might expect. We had just I had just been paid an executive producer fee for the American remake of our first film, a horror film called Midnight Man. And with my executive producer fee, I initially thought, great, I've just been paid $25,000. I thought I was rich at the time. But Damon even saying the first time he got paid, it was something like that, and he thought, great. And it does feel great the first time. And my first thought was, will I apply for funding here to make a horror film, which is what I wanted to do. But I discovered I couldn't get the funds for the horror film here. So I took the money and I thought, I can either spend this money on myself, which would be nice, or maybe I should make an independent film. And so this film, Naked, was actually financed with equity, and the money came from America. And the big shock for us when the film finally came out in 2019 was that the best-selling market was the United States. So I'm really grateful to the customers in America, even during difficult times like these. They've been buying our film, and obviously they're people probably with a background in the arts very often. They might be artists, they might be models, or people maybe with just an interest in nudity in the arts in general.
And by the way, just if anyone's paying attention, in America, we are, Edward and I have spoken about this before, we're more than happy to do a screening of Naked at any theater or whatnot. We can simulcast Edward in for a Q&A. I've contacted theaters. I spent a lot of last year doing this with some people here, and the naturist camps are the few remaining, and they all seem to be on a death ride. They don't seem to care about having people or paid events. But anyway, that if anyone is an organizer, is something that we're certainly game for.
Yes, that sounds wonderful. We actually did arrange a screening of Naked along the lines of what you're describing at the Naturist organization here in Ireland. And that was a few years ago. And it went really well. And yeah, the distributor Journeyman does organize educational screenings. So we'd be up for that if that's possible.
Well, Edward, as two confirmed bachelors here, Who Can Find a Good Wife? Tell us about this latest project, the naming of it, and its inspiration, and we'll take it from there. Here, by the way, for the audience, we have Edward's Kennedy Pictures Limited Instagram, and we'll take a look here at some appropriate images from the film.
Yes, these are some of the latest stills from our new short film, Who Can Find a Good Wife? Well, the genesis of this project came from the Bible. So I am a practicing Catholic. Unlike many people in my country, Ireland,
Oh.
it's really dying out in organized religion in this country. I believe that it's getting an uptick in the United States. There's more people attending church there, but in Ireland, it's a bit of a sad story. There's fewer and fewer people. But I do read the Bible, and I've gotten a lot of inspiration from the Bible for my films. And I was reading the book of Proverbs, and there's a question in the book of Proverbs. I think in the original edition, the question is, who can find a virtuous woman? And I felt that was not quite the right title for the film. So I rewrote it in plain English for a modern audience. And in the version of the Bible I have, it was a good wife who can find. So I just changed the order to who can find a good wife. And the film is about two Irish half-sisters, and they're named Fia and Fola. And they live in a Victorian house in a town called Dunlara, where I live. And in English, you can just call it Dunleary. And they both have
Queenstown. We're gonna be what do they call them up in Belfast? The Colin. What do you call the loyalists? We're gonna be loyal. We're gonna stick to Queenstown. Isn't that the old term?
It was actually called Kingstown.
Kingstown. Okay, there we go. Queenstown was the Titanic place, wasn't it?
But that was 100 years ago. We changed that. There was a change of government. So now we call it Dunlara, which we're happy with. And that's, by the way, that's Irish for fort. Dún is fort, and Lyra was an Irish high king, and it means calf herder. So it means fort of the calf herder. Most people in this town don't even know that. But anyway, it's set in this town, and you have these two sisters. They're called Fia and Fola, and you can see a picture of them both there on the Instagram page. And they're played by two wonderful young actors called Nancy Collins and Erin Hand. And in the film, these two sisters are very, very different. One, the younger one, Fola, is devout, and the older one is a hedonist. She goes out on the town every Saturday night and parties and gets drunk and has fun. And I thought it would be really interesting to explore a triangular relationship with this film. So I play a character called Rockwood, who is an Englishman from Yorkshire. And what happens is, there's a still of me, what happens is the older sister, Fia, played by Nancy Collins, is in a relationship with Rockwood, the Englishman, and her younger sister, Fola, becomes infatuated with her sister's older boyfriend. So you end up with this triangular relationship, and the question is, how does he resolve this problem?
And by the way, I will occasionally watch Mass from Ireland on a production company. I don't think is from Ireland. It's called Shalom World. I think it's from India or something like that. But anyhow, they broadcast a Mass from I think it's called Port Lisha.
Okay, yeah.
And it seems to be, this particular church seems to be doing all right. But I do joke with myself that they have the church choir that they'll have occasionally sing, and I call it the Polish choir. And it's not the Polish choir at all. It's the church choir, but there's so many Poles in this particular church. I would say, having watched this for a couple of years now, I would say like 1/4 of this Irish parish is actually Irish, and then 1/4 are Poles, and then the rest are Africans and Asians.
Yes.
To your point about the condition of Christianity in Ireland, it is quite remarkable, just the demographic observation.
It is, and it's the same in my town, Dunleary. I mean, our church was about half full at the last mass I attended, and the other people there, you would have a lot of Filipinos,
Mm-hmm.
of course, are Catholics. I'm sure some Asians, and then perhaps some Polish people as well, but very few young people. Very few.
And we'll get back to the film here, but I heard it said, and I'd like your thoughts on this matter, being an outsider altogether, but that for whatever, because of certain scandals in the 90s and so forth, maybe for reasons of globalization and indeed from America, outside interference in cultural developments, uh, that the Irish, in a sense, have almost turned the energy they once turned about towards British colonization and British culture and certain observations, and that ire, in our day, they've almost turned it against the church as a similar, in this presentation, as a similar outside force, and it's. I'm not saying it's justified or not. That's another discussion, but it does seem to have a certain the certain trends of Irish culture seem to have those echoes, and I don't know if you have any mind on that topic.
That's a very good point, John. And you're the first person who's framed it in that way. Um, well, I grew up while all this was happening. I'm 44 and I'm a millennial. So when the scandals broke out in the 90s, I heard them on the radio, the scandals of the Catholic Church, and we're all very aware of them. And I mean, they've happened everywhere. They've happened in America, they've happened in Ireland, they've happened in
Mm.
Europe, and so on. And I think many Irish people did stop practicing around then. I noticed, for example, my
Mm.
parents stopped going then. And in fact, for a long period of time, I stopped going.
Mm.
And it wasn't until about 10 years ago that, ironically, I was on a holiday to France. And I just wandered into a beautiful Catholic church in Nice.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, I could go back here. But it was just a feeling for me. And I think faith often has a way of just drifting into your life, almost like a feeling. It's not even an intellectual thing, it's a feeling. But I think you're right that Irish people have been gradually removing certain influences. I mean, obviously, when we were a colony of the United Kingdom, that matter came to a head in the revolution between 1916 and 1921. And then you have the Vatican, which is this remained this omnipresent force. And it was really powerful in Ireland throughout the 20th century. I think Americans were struck by that whenever they came here. And it all began to change in the 1990s. And I remember it very well. And there's many reasons why young people in particular don't want to practice as Catholics. And I can't speak for them, but one thing I think is, the legacy of the Magdalene laundries.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if your viewers or listeners are aware of them.
Yeah, fill us in. Not everyone knows about this. I think there was a film too, maybe 20 years ago on this point, wasn't there?
That's right. And there's a new film with Cillian Murphy about it again called Small Things Like These. But the Magdalene laundries were laundries run by the Roman Catholic Church, and there were nuns running them. And many women who had children out of wedlock, as the phrase was at the time, ended up in these laundries, spending very long periods of time and separated from their children. And there was a lot of institutional abuse at the time. And there are two films about it. One is, I think, The Magdalene Laundries, which is a film directed by Peter Mullen. And I think you can get that somewhere. And then Cillian Murphy made a very interesting film about 2 years ago, which you can get on Netflix, which is called Small Things Like These. And it's based on a book by Claire Keegan. And that film also deals with the legacy of the Magdalene Laundries. So I think a lot of young people just thought, we're not going to have anything to do with this anymore because of the scandals. And there are reasons for young people to be upset. I don't deny that all of these things happened. They did. I don't deny the abuse cases, and I don't deny that. I think it's very important that all the victims are heard, and all the victims of any of those scandals get a redress for whatever happened. But I do think that the Christian faith has a place in our lives. That's where I come in, and I think that the message itself from Jesus is good in all of the denominations. Love your neighbor as yourself, and love God, and of course the message of forgiveness and the commandments: don't kill and don't steal. I think that the problem is that many people didn't hear the message right in the past, and if they'd heard the message right, they wouldn't have done the things that they did. They wouldn't have made the mistakes that they made.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And we'll return to some of these cultural topics when we look at the anniversary of 1916 and these things a little bit later in our time together. But let's not bypass Who Can Find a Good Wife. So let's return to that. And Edward, what was the development in terms of the script? We learned a little bit about the inspiration from the Holy Bible and so forth. And what was the inspiration for this? And then also coming off the heels of these comments on faith, I spoke to actually a Catholic author in these United States, and actually there was another person from that confession. I should think more famous at the moment, Flannery O'Connor, who did some living down the road in Reading and Ridgefield for a while. And in either instance, both my former guest author and Flannery O'Connor, speaking about faith in the production of art. They both made the point, maybe one piggybacking off the other, that one needs to be a good storyteller and a good artist before they are a good evangelist. Because if you don't do that, you have the phenomena in America. A lot of religious art is not very artistic at all, and in fact, even amongst confessing people, it's not held up to be very high art in certain communities, and justly so. It's considered very cheesy, very corny, and so forth. So if you have, beyond the inspiration, the development of the script, any insights on that deft hand that one needs when it comes to faith and art and virtue and whatever other themes you may bring up in this film?
Yeah, it's a good question, John. Well, I will say that the story of Who Can Find a Good Wife it has religious undertones, but ultimately, I wouldn't frame it as an exclusively religious story. Ultimately, it's a love triangle between two Irish sisters and an Englishman. And just one of the characters is religious. The other two, in fact, are not religious at all. And I think that I would describe the film as a romantic comedy drama. It's just under 20 minutes long, and we've sent it to film festivals, Cannes Directors Fortnight, and some festivals in Ireland, and we'll be sending it to festivals in the USA later this year. Certainly, we'd love to send it to Sundance and so forth. But so the inspiration came from the Bible, but what we really wanted to talk about, John, was where is the institution of marriage in 2026? And I think this is also true of the United States of America, but in my country, Ireland, and in the UK next door, half of adults are single now.
Yeah.
And, it's not an unusual thing to be single in your 40s anymore. And of course, we all have these apps, and I have them too. I think they're everywhere. We have an app for everything: parking and dating and movies and everything now. But I was conscious of this, and I said to myself, by the way, my brother and sister are married. That's great, and I am not skeptical of marriage at all. But many of us are single today. So that question, who can find a good wife, really struck me as an interesting one. And by the way, for women, they can also ask the question, who can find a good husband? And it's an equally valid question. And but strangely enough, people don't seem to ask that question on TV these days. And when I chose this title of the film, a lot of people did come up to me and say, "Why did you call your film that?" And I said, "Well, it's in the Bible." And so that was the question that we started with. And by the end of the film, you get an answer, but I think it's sort of an ironic ending. So this is a still on Instagram here from my new film, Who Can Find a Good Wife? And this is a wonderful young actor called Nancy Collins, and she plays a character called Fia Collins in the film. And in this scene, Fia is confronting her sister Fola about a betrayal which has taken place. And I won't say too much more because it would be giving away the secrets of the plot. But you see the character played by me on the left, Rock Wood, and he's caught in between these two warring sisters. And one of the themes in the film is betrayal. I wanted to explore that a little bit. And I think it's something that probably touches upon many of us in life. And I think if it's a family member, it can be a particularly tense situation. So in this film, you have the younger sister played by Erin Hand. She's Fola Hanley, and she becomes infatuated with her older sister Fia's boyfriend, Rock. And so she writes a list of bad things that her sister has done out of spite. And she gives my character the list. And that's what happens in this scene.
Now, Edward, you had said earlier that the film is 20 minutes long, and I've done some very, very minor film work for different reenacting shorts that people will do for colleges or local. We call it PBS. It'd be like BBC or something. I don't know. RTE is like your national or your local. Yeah, is like that for us. And, little kid shows with the Civil War, because I do Civil War reenacting. You mentioned your film's 20 minutes long. Oh, wow. And then we had this whole song and dance at the beginning of the recording about money for financing. Edward, how long does it take to produce 20 minutes of footage for people who are unfamiliar?
Well, you're not going to believe this, but we started filming Who Can Find a Good Wife in October of 2024, and we finished filming in April of 2025. But during post-production, I decided that we needed to go back and do some additional photography, which is not unusual in our business. Sometimes you need to just get a few extra shots, and we needed some aerial photography or drone shots. So we did a little bit more work in October without the ladies. They'd moved on to other projects. And that was just my cameraman, Billy, and I. It was a skeleton crew. And I want to give my cameraman, Billy Keane, a mention. He did a wonderful job on the film and worked very, very hard. So how long does it take to produce a 20-minute film? I mean, this is kind of embarrassing, but we worked on this film for a year and a half. But I have a bit of a quirk. One of my favorite filmmakers is the late American filmmaker Stanley Kubrick. And I know and he's just one of the greatest filmmakers, of course, and you'll know his films The Shining and Barry Lyndon and Full Metal Jacket and Eyes Wide Shut and 2001 Space Odyssey. And one of the quirks of the great Stanley Kubrick was the longer his films took, the more he seemed to like it. And he had a great financier, Warner Brothers, to finance his films. I think I have this quirk. I'm not presuming to compare myself to this man at all, but I look up to him. He's a great filmmaker. But I like taking time. And I think that it's a luxury that is diminishing in our industry. In fact, one of the things that I am not comfortable with in the film industry in the last 10 years or so is that the windows for the shooting schedule are getting smaller and smaller. And you're now expected to film a feature film in 3 weeks, which I think is just nuts. But you might wonder, how on earth did we take a year and a half to do this? Well, this is what happened. My film was financed by a grant from the Irish government, from the Department of Culture. And it's actually, I'm going to tell you what it is for your viewers. They might be interested. It's called the Basic Income Arts Grant. And it was the first grant of its kind in the history of the world, actually. And what the grant did was it paid a group of 2,000 artists to make art. And some of us were filmmakers, some of us were musicians, some of us were poets or artists. And so what we got the payment once every month from the Department of Culture. So that might make more sense. We ended up filming one day every month. And it might sound very slow, but I think it's a credit to my cast and crew. They came back every month over a period of about 6 months. And that's me there, and that's Aaron, the other actor. They're both wonderful, Nancy Collins and Aaron Hand. They came back every month. And so it did take 6 months to shoot. Then editing took a long time because we needed to find music from different countries and different sources. Yeah. So altogether, a year and a half's work.
Yeah, I have a similar, not nearly as much as that, but I've done, little kid shows, as I say, and you'll be there, for 12 hours, 15 hours for 5 or 10 minutes at the final thing. And then sometimes they don't even run this stuff on the PBS and, and all this. And that's, it's funny on this series, Edward, there's another filmmaker that I've interviewed a few times with some of his helpers, and that's J.P. Riley, who produced a few things, but Act Naturally, which was a naturist feature. And then there was a sequel to that, which I believe was supposed to be called and is supposed to be called Act Supernaturally, about these sisters that inherit a camp when their father dies in a naturist camp. You just heard me switch the tenses between past tense and present tense. It was called, it is called. That's because talking about how long it is and the problems with financing and getting cast back in their instance. It's taken them like 15 years to put this feature together, Act Supernaturally, between the different hurdles, so long that certain of the cast members have died in the meantime. It is really a tough road to hoe unless you have a Warner Brothers or a big shot outfit behind you.
Well, that's definitely the longest shoot that I've ever heard of. And fair play to them for finishing the film. I will always say anyone who has made a film from beginning to end and finished it, I always respect that, because it takes a lot of love. And that's a page from the script of our film, Who Can Find a Good Wife, there for any of your viewers who want to tune into Instagram at Kennedy Pictures Limited. But it is hard work. And look, things take the time they take. That must be in the Guinness Book of Records, though, 15 years.
Must be approaching it, yes. You must have the temptation. I have it in my own way with my work. And just maybe you can speak for things you've observed from similar artists. You have a good idea. You want to get it done. You're chomping at the bit. You maybe have some resources to get it done. The temptation, I know in my own work, is to go ahead with something, even if it's subpar. That's the danger, right? You have the passion project, and there's a whole battlefield, God help us, a junkyard perhaps. We know this in our different vocations here, of people that have gone ahead with passion projects and made a mess of them. That the idea was good, they had some gasoline to work with to get somewhere on the journey, and then it conks out halfway through, and the final product is certainly not what they had in mind, even if the idea was good. And have you known that temptation or seen similar filmmakers or artists in general with that, right? You want to go ahead, you're chomping at the bit, but you don't quite have the resources to really pull it off. And what do you do in that scenario?
Oh, yes, that happens all the time. I was just meeting with my film editor today about the next film festival that we're sending our film to, and we're just organizing that. And he was just telling me about that very difficulty with one of his projects. And as I said earlier, one of my scripts, Archie the Parrot, hasn't gotten funding. And it happens to everyone. I mean, even if you pick one of the greatest filmmakers, I mentioned Stanley Kubrick, there was a film that he wrote, Napoleon. And I think it would have been a beautiful film. And he worked on it, I believe, for 3 years, but the financing fell through. So it happens at the top level, and it happens at the middle level, and it happens at the lower levels. And I think here's the thing in life. There's a saying, I can't remember who said it. One of the Hollywood studio heads might have said it, but there's a God for the movies. There's a God for the movies alone. And what I would say is it's not always in our hands. In fact, it's not in our hands whether a film gets a green light or not. Some films happen and some films don't. And that's one of the ones that hasn't happened yet, I would say. But I will come back to it. But I think it is one of the problems. And one of the things I heard David Lynch talking about this too, the late David Lynch, who I was a great
Mm,
admirer of. He said, some films get made and some films don't. And you need to be zen about this. And so we ended up making Who Can Find a Good Wife? And it's almost spooky the way some of these things
mm,
happen. Why did that one happen when I was intending to do a murder mystery film? And I'm one of these people, since I am religious, I might as
mm,
well go back to that. I sometimes think we get nudged in a certain
mm,
direction in life. You met that person. Why did you meet that person that day? And
mhm,
why did that film, Who Can Find a Good Wife, get made? And I was emailing with a company in the UK recently. I won't mention the name, but they're an Oscar-winning company and they're very well financed. And the woman there said, "We're looking for scripts in the horror space."
hmm.
So the script that I'm writing now, I'm writing because she said, "Send me something in the horror space." So I think probably we need to come back to something that is fundamental about this, which is that it's a business,
Mm.
and that we need to listen to the people who control the money, which is a learning process. And if they say, "I want a horror script," sometimes that's what we have to write. Now, it doesn't mean that it won't be a beautiful film. It just means that the people who are employing the artists.
Yes, well said. You mentioned Kubrick, and I certainly appreciate his work as well. Uh, do you know what his last studio film was? And this is a good setup for where we can take this very discussion. Do you know what his last studio film was?
Yes, I'm thinking of Eyes Wide Shut. Is that the one you were thinking of?
Oh, excuse me. I mean, the last that is his last film. But what
Yeah.
I'm asking, and I should have clarified, is when he was working under a contract in the traditional sense before he was
Yes.
given the liberty to go off and make the first one after hint hint would be Barry Lyndon. So what
Oh,
was
I
the
see.
one he made
Uh,
before when he was kind of a creature of the old studio system?
you think of A Clockwork Orange?
No, Spartacus.
Oh, Spartacus. Yes, yes, exactly. That older one. Yes, I have seen it. And that's an interesting one to study because I know for a fact, having read biographies of Mr. Kubrick, that he wasn't very happy with that particular film because he didn't have full artistic control. But it's a very successful film, and it made money, and it was nominated for many Academy Awards.
Yes, and what strikes me about that, to your very point, and to his point, apparently, is that you can tell just by watching it, without knowing anything about Kubrick, that whoever made that film, Spartacus,
Mm.
was chomping at the bit. Like you could see Kubrick and his creativity trying to get out in that film, uh, even to using that Jewish guy who wrote that. That guy was a big shot in the 1950s.
Dalton Trumbo, was it?
Yeah, yes, I believe it was Dalton Trumbo.
Yes.
And if it wasn't Dalton Trumbo, it was E. E. Howard. It was one of those guys, but they were blacklisted and they were naughty in the power structure of the time in any case. But the very fact that Kubrick would use a script from either of those guys, I think it was Trumbo that you mentioned it. Uh, that even shows he was kind of a scofflaw, so to speak, even within the constraints of the industry.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that particular production, but I want to go back and see the film again now because I adore his later films, which he made with full creative control, such
Mm,
as Doctor Strangelove or 2001: A Space Odyssey,
mhm,
or the one I just mentioned, Clockwork Orange, or Barry Lyndon, which was filmed in Ireland and which he made because he couldn't get the financing for Napoleon. And actually, Stanley Kubrick's stepdaughter, Katharina, is on Instagram, and I've been in touch with her briefly. And she worked on this film as a location scout on Barry
mm,
Lyndon. But I think that's a really interesting tension that you just mentioned in Hollywood around 1960 when he made Spartacus, and the issue of the blacklist and the writers who have been blacklisted, I think, under the McCarthy era. And I don't know what Stanley Kubrick's attitude was toward that, but I feel that he was he was extremely young. He was only about 30, very ambitious young man, maybe 31 or 2. And his previous film was Paths of Glory, which was a war film.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So there's another, kind of we would say libertarian type of film. Yes, yes.
Yes, yes, and that was about corruption in World War One amongst the French generals. And I think that one went very well. And then Kirk Douglas turned to Kubrick because the first director on Spartacus was replaced, I believe, after about a week's shooting. So he was a hired hand, and I don't think Kubrick was comfortable as a hired hand on someone else's production. And so I do know that after that film, whatever happened on it, he moved to the UK with his young wife, and he made Lolita next, and all of his films subsequently were made with full creative control in the UK. And that's a really interesting theme in our business, the whole issue of art versus commerce and how much control you have. And I am delighted to say that on Naked and Who Can Find a Good Wife, I did have control. And to be honest, for me as a filmmaker, Final Cut is the only way I can work.
Well, that was where I was going with this. Excellent, excellent on ramp, and that is, I'm in a few weeks. I mentioned my kind of hobby of reenacting, and that means I get called in and voluntold to do a lot of things around town. And one of the things I have been doing the past couple of years is going to a local public school for a couple of days and imitating a Revolutionary War soldier with some other people. We do a little game with the kids for their history classes. And every year, Edward, that I do this, and we see the page for Naked here, and all of these links, including Instagram for the audience and Edward's KennedyPictures.ie, are down below. So check those out and patronize Edward. But every year, Edward, I go to the public school. I have that, that itch in the back of my mind, and I think it's probably similar for artists of your sort as well, which is, damn, if I should just become, a public school teacher. I can get a real paycheck, I get a pension, vacation time. I don't have to reinvent the damn wheel every day and build a school from scratch. And then you remember, right? I mean, this is with filmmakers, I should think, right? You want to, oh damn, I could work for Netflix, I could work for BBC, I could, I don't know what you do for your, I don't know if Hammer, there's my knowledge of British film. It's Hammer Films from the 1970s. That's all I know about that neck of your neck of the woods there. But whatever the case, then you realize if I got that job or worked at the mainstream schools, I would have no creative license whatsoever as a teacher. I'd be a total, I mean, literally in this week of filming, we've had at the White House in America, the first lady going on about literally had like a robot and going on about the robots are going to teach the kids now, and this is so great. I mean, they literally have like a Jetsons robot, and this is going to be the wave of the future. And if I, anyway, I'll put a sock in it here, but if I went in for the mainstream, as I imagine is a temptation for your sort, in filmmaker, you would have the baubles, and you would have the 9 to 5, and you would have a lot less headaches. I would have a lot less headaches, and yet the thing that makes us what we are, the creativity, would not be allowed.
That's very true. And I do appreciate your emphasis on the humanities at the ApocatastasisInstitute. I went to a liberal arts school myself, which is not very well known in Dublin. And I ended up doing A-levels, not the Leaving Cert, which is the Irish education system. A-levels are the British one. But we were able to focus on humanities type subjects. We were able to focus on history and art. And I think it's a good approach to education. And I wish it were more common. But it's a good question you pose about the conflict between art on the one hand and commerce on the other. And, it's funny we mentioned Stanley Kubrick. He managed that somehow brilliantly, because he made films like 2001 or A Clockwork Orange, which eventually made an awful lot of money. Eyes Wide Shut, the last one. And they're also considered great works of art. So the question that I asked many years ago when I used to study Kubrick's work, I still do, and you can ask the same question about David Lynch. Can you make a work of art and make money? And with Naked, we seem to be straddling it. We'll recoup the costs in a couple of years. Admittedly, the economics of streaming are pretty terrible. Those are the links to purchase the film there if you wish.
There we go.
Pictures. But the economics of streaming aren't great. It's different at the movies. if your film like Project Hail Mary, the new Ryan Gosling film, is at the multiplexes, people can go and buy tickets, and you should have box office flowing in within a matter of weeks. With streaming, with an independent film like this, it's more a matter of years. So you're playing the long game, and it's a slow burner. But I don't think that business is a bad word, and I don't think commerce is a bad word. And when I decided to write a horror film for this company that asked for one recently, I thought to myself, the horror genre is a very interesting genre. And when we go back in history and we look at films like The Shining or The Exorcist from America, or The Innocents in England, or The Ring in Japan, these are all fascinating films. And so I think that a genre can be very interesting because there's a set of rules that you work within. And this is the poster I've designed for Dancing with Death, which is the next film that I'm writing now. And I think it's a challenge, but I love the idea of balancing art with commerce. And can we get it? Can we get the scales even? We'll wait and see.
That's it. And yeah, I mean, it's a question, a topic as old as the hills when it comes to art, is that that very dynamic. You go back to the Renaissance, go back this morning before we met, I had a class in Latin, and we were going over the Aeneid, and Virgil, he is an employee of Augustus, and
Yes.
that shows in the Aeneid. There's a lot of butt kissing that goes on with the line of Augustus and all this stuff, but he's paying, Augustus is paying the bills, and it allows Virgil to make this masterpiece, whatever its fingerprints of patronage are otherwise.
So true. And I was always fascinated by the relationship between Michelangelo and the Pope when he was painting the Sistine Chapel, and we studied that in school, and I think that there was a fiery relationship. And I know that Michelangelo wanted to make sculptures because that was his favorite art form, but he was told, do your job, and he was commissioned to paint the Sistine Chapel. And I suppose we're lucky he did, because it's stunning. But I think that another great director, my brother went to see him live, he's since passed away sadly, Wes Craven. He made horror films like A Nightmare on Elm Street, and I mean, he was an artist, Wes Craven. He had intellectual ideas, and I know he came from an academic background like yourself. And I know that one of the things that he said to the late Wes Craven before he died was, this is a business. And to look at it in any other way is actually idiotic. I think he did say that. And it's tough, but I do think that if you can come up with something that is commercial and also a really interesting idea, you're golden. And the Beatles, I don't think anybody would argue that the Beatles were great musicians. And they're also the best-selling band. And I think you only have to look at James Cameron, that great Canadian director who works within Hollywood for Disney. He makes the Avatar films. I mean, they're a feast for the senses, and interesting ideas in there too, interesting science fiction ideas and so on. So I don't think it's a bad thing when films are successful, but it's a balancing act, isn't it? And with this next one, Dancing with Death, that I'm writing now, again, it does take some inspiration from religion. Basically, it's a story about an adopted girl in Dublin, and her name is Rosa, and she's an adopted Spanish girl, and she's sort of the outsider at school. And I mean, Ireland is no different from the United States or the UK. There are people who are the outsiders in school and the insiders. Sure. And this girl is not cool. And to fit in with the clique that she wants to be a part of, she agrees to participate in a Black Mass event on Halloween. And she ends up in a situation where she leaves early, but her classmate gets possessed, ends up being a victim of demonic possession. And so this girl, Rosa, has a gift. She's a medium, and she ends up working with a priest who works as an exorcist in Dublin to save the girl who's been possessed. And so what I wanted to do was mix genres with this film. So it's sort of a mixture of The Exorcist and Mean Girls. which
There you go.
yeah, so it's a combination of the two, but it's been fun so far. I'm still writing the film; it isn't finished.
It's funny you mentioned Wes Craven. He did a film here in New Milford, Connecticut, and this had been 2006-7, a horror film, and he filmed all around here, Candlewood Lake, which is a fake lake up the road here, Power Lake. But he also used the house of a friend of mine at the time, just down the road, for his principal photography for those scenes. So a little bit of local lore with Wes Craven there. I forget the name of that film. It wasn't one of the spin-offs of, what's that?
Was it called Cursed?
It might have been. I'm
That went around. And my brother loves his film. So do I.
Oh, okay.
And
I'll have to look it up now.
yeah, the original film Scream, obviously
Yes, wowzers.
franchise, but the original film Scream, honestly, I think is a terrific film, and that's an example of a good script, really well cast, great director, and it was a terrific film. And I have to say, in my opinion, vastly superior to all of the sequels, which obviously Craven wasn't involved with in the last couple of years.
Well, they're still pumping those out. There's like Scream 10 or something coming out this year. So, golly, talk about commerce and that aspect.
I know, and there are excesses to it. I mean, look, it's a business, and if people want to keep making them, more power to them. But for me, I'm reminded of the late Christopher Reeve's comment that people suffer from sequelitis. They keep making sequels. And the one thing I will say for all of our films, Midnight Man, which is my brother's horror film, you can get that on YouTube if you search for Midnight Man, Rob Kennedy. And that got a remake in America, The Midnight Man, which came in 2016. But whether you look at Midnight Man, my brother's film, on YouTube by Rob Kennedy, or Naked, or Who Can Find a Good Wife, the one thing about our films is they're all originals. And I remember George Martin, the late Sir George Martin, said that about the Beatles. They never gave me Star Wars 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They always gave me something fresh. And that's what we want to do at Kennedy Pictures. We want to give you something fresh and something you haven't seen. And sometimes it succeeds and sometimes it doesn't.
There was a film in the 1980s, maybe early 1990s, called My Girl, which was well received here. Dan Aykroyd, Jamie Lee Curtis, and the girl from Boy Meets World, whom I forget her name, and Macaulay Culkin was in that. So it must have been the 90s. And sometimes one installment is just what you need, because there was a sequel to that made, My Girl too, and it's one of you kill the story. Some of these stories are so delicate and they're so well done, and then some money man down in Hollywood, it gets in their head they can cash in, and you just do you really need to see the girl from Boy Meets World 3 years after it? No, you should have just left it at that moment. And there's many films and books, for that matter, that have suffered similar slings and arrows.
I know, it's so true. And that was a hit here in Ireland as well. My Girl, I remember because it came out right after Home Alone, and was a superstar. And I know his brother is an excellent actor too. He's just won an Academy Award, Kieran Culkin, for another film recently. But yeah, it's so true. I mean, when I was at a Film Ireland Expo last year, somebody joked to me, "What's the next film? Naked 2?" And as you know, it's not. It's Who Can Find a Good Wife, because that's my point. We always want to do something different. And we do understand that, sometimes people want to repeat. If it's a film like The Godfather and it makes a huge amount of money, or Avatar, I understand. They want to make another one. I think the challenge is making a really great sequel, which Francis Ford Coppola pulled off with The Godfather Part 2. And George Lucas pulled off with Irvin Kershner on The Empire Strikes Back. And they're two happy exceptions to the rule. But unfortunately, that's not the norm. And I think a lot of the time we see a sequel and it's just done for the money. But hey, we understand why. It's a business.
That's that. But Edward, before we knock off, we'll keep you for a few more minutes here, maybe just two final points, and then anything else you'd like to contribute. One of which is, if you can tell us, we're, as of this recording, coming up on the anniversary of the Easter Rising, which you reminded me is the 110th anniversary. still stuck in the 100th anniversary and where's the decade gone? So if you could tell us a bit about that, and especially artistically, it strikes me as someone who's very interested in folk music, that that's an event which is, well, initially, I understand the rising itself was very poorly received by Irish people, especially in Dublin, not the least of which is because the city was burned down and people were resentful at the rebels for that. And yet the event becomes canonized in street balladry and poetry, and it suffers or not suffers, but enjoyed a tremendous revival because of art, almost directly because of its mythologizing in art, which went on, like the larger cultural revival, to have political and military outcomes subsequently. So anyway, if you could tell us what the Rising was, and you had mentioned some family background there, and anything else you'd like to bring up in terms of that anniversary, and then I'll ask you for a poem or two to wind things down.
Well, I do have some information here, and I'll just set it aside about the build-up to the Rising. And indeed, one of my father's uncles was involved in the 1916 Rising. First off, I would say I'm glad you brought it up. You're the first person to bring up the Rising to me, in some time. It's not something that people in my generation talk about very much because it's a distant part of Irish history. It took place 110 years ago. So you asked me to start with the revival of the Gaelic League and the Irish cultural revival prior to the Rising. I did look up that for you, and the Gaelic League was established in 1893 by Owen MacNeill, and as you know, their goal was to revive the Irish language, which had almost become obsolete at that time after hundreds of years of English rule in Ireland. And they wanted to also revive it as a literary language and as a spoken language. So the Gaelic League, or Conrad na Gaeilge in Irish, ran Irish-speaking events. They published a newspaper too, which was called An Cloth Solish, and that means the sword of light. And, they published verse, they published prose, and they campaigned successfully to have the Irish language declared a compulsory subject at the National University of Ireland. So I think they were making some serious headway promoting Irish and so forth. And the membership of the Gaelic League was mostly lower middle class Irish people who spoke English in the urban areas, mostly Dublin, I suspect. Now, I'm not a historian, but moving on from that, in 1914, the IRB took over the Gaelic League, and they were the Irish Republican Brotherhood, which was a militant organization that was planning the War of Independence, or the Irish Revolution. And the 1916 Rising was the first phase of the Irish War of Independence. And curiously, one thing I learned here, which in fact I only discovered recently, is that the American War of Independence and the Irish War of Independence both started in the month of April, which
interesting.
It's just a synchronicity. It might not be a synchronicity because the Irish revolutionaries did look to America for inspiration. I know that. And so what I do know—
for money too, and for money historically.
Money for financing. And I think they also attempted to import arms from Germany, which was very controversial at that time because England was at war with Germany, of course, in World War I. So the Rising, you're right, was a failure militarily. It was swiftly crushed because, of course, the British Empire at that time was, I believe, the biggest empire in the world at that time. And that's also a distant memory now. It's a sore point for some, but not for us. But, my dad's uncle, Gerald Feeney, was involved in the Rising. And I think he was in the forecourts. And we proved this because we went to Collins Barracks, which is a museum in Ireland, and we found his signature in the Rising. So as you can see, some of the city was blown up and very badly damaged, and there were a lot of civilian casualties. By the way, it was really serious. You're talking about hundreds of people, I believe, who were either injured or killed. So you're right, it was put down by the English swiftly, and the Irish population were initially hostile to it. What I do know is that the British made a major miscalculation. They decided to sentence the leaders of the rising to death. And famously, one of the leaders, Eamon de Valera, was spared because he was in fact born in America. So I think the big turning point for Ireland was when the leaders were killed. Irish people then began to support the effort to establish an independent country and run our own government and our own affairs. So I do know that after that, the Gaelic League, as it was known, was declared illegal in 1919. Today, it still exists, Conradh na Gaeilge, and it promotes the Irish language and literature. And even today, there's about 100,000 more people speaking Irish than there were 10 years ago. A wonderful phrase that I can share with you, and it goes like this: Tír gan teanga, tír gan anam. And that's a Shannockle, which is an old proverb. And it means a country without a language, a country without a soul. And then there's another Shannockle that I'll share with you, which is Is Owen Ciaun a Hagan on Ciard. And that one is more mysterious, but it's my favorite one. And it means it is from the head that the craft comes. And I particularly like that one because whenever you're planning a film or a poem or you're writing a book, it all starts up here. It all starts at the head.
Excellent. So we began with the proverb, who can find a good wife?
Yes.
Couched as a question from Solomon, and we end with some Irish wisdom there, some insights. Edward, did you have any poems to bring down the bird that you could share with us?
I'm absolutely terrible, unfortunately, at reciting my poetry because I haven't memorized any of them by heart. But I can tell you where you can get two of my volumes. Excuse me. My first volume is called Grow Love, and Grow is the word for love in Irish. So that's available on Kindle on Amazon. And the second volume of poetry is called Season of the Spirit, and that's also available on Kindle on Amazon. And the third one was an experimental volume of poetry on Substack, which sort of combined art, photography, and poetry. The next one, I haven't begun writing yet, but I'm planning it, and it's going to be a book, and I think I'd like to release it as a paperback and move back to the traditional format.
Excellent. Well, all of these links, including these most recent ones with the books, will be down below. And people, please help Edward out and do more. Help yourself out and check out some of his output with Naked and with some of these other books and so forth. And indeed, thank you for your attention. And Edward, especially, thank you for your insights. It's been great to catch up with you.
Thanks so much, John. It's been a pleasure.
And just on a lighter note, as we end here, I'll put a humorous song about the Gaelic language, little folk song here. This is called Limb of the Law, and it's sung by Siobhan Hart, who is the granddaughter of Frank Hart, who is a balladeer from Dublin. So with that, we will end. Over and out.
You can tell by me feet I'm the limb of the law. The people of Dublin for me have no bra. They hiss me and boo me as I pass them by. Sinn Féin up the rebels, you'd hear them all cry. You might think that's bad, but there's one thing that's worse. That grand Irish language for me is a curse, and dirty brain and yabbering like an old ass's bray. The castle expects me to know what they say. With the comb of brome, you'd hear them all say, I'm digging to me, on Sinn Féin hooray. It's the wind go will in this doilem not gay. Tá may it foul among Gael. I've a friend on the force and he's courting the cook. And what's he you know, but she bought him a book with Irish on the side and English on that, so small I could carry it around in me hat. First learn the letters and then the whole phrase. I'll have it all off in a couple of days, and they're gibbering and yabbering I'll soon understand. Such a learning vacation should stagger the land. With the comb of Rome you'd hear them all say, I'm digging to me, I'm Sinn Féin hooray. This Doyle go will and this Doyle I'm not gay. Oh, may it foul among Gael. God, now this book I procured, to learn I must try. And will may means are, yeah, will to mean my. It's Doyle I think that I do understand. My love is me foot and my close is me hand. Oh, may it foul I'm learning, you see. If I keep up like this, an inspector I'll be. I'm getting so big that I don't know the cat. Me head is two sizes too large for me hat. With the comb of Rome you'd hear them all say, I'm digging to me, I'm Sinn Féin hooray. This Doyle go will and this Doyle I'm not gay. Tommy ain't foul among Gael. Gone now with learning vacation, I'm bloody near dead. I lie on the floor 'cause I can't lie in bed. I'm walking and talking when I'm fast asleep. When I hear up the rebels, me flesh starts to creep. My friends have all left me, I've now but a few. I'm walking around like a wandering Jew. With the comb of Rome, you hear them all say, I'm digging to me, I'm Sinn Féin hooray. This Doyle go will and this Doyle I'm not gay. Tommy, they foul them on Gael.